But you want to undo progress that's been done. So I'm curious as to what decade you'd be comfortable living in, especially as a Black woman.
I'm actually an educator. I teach sociology and LGBTQ studies.
Most people would identify that claim as pretty extreme and pretty
Children are extreme.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we're going to be covering Candace Owens' recent appearance on Jubilee, where she debated 20 feminists in a surrounded segment. Now, there are some good learning moments here and some critiques and arguments that Candace maybe should have used, and also that we can all use in our personal lives when we come across these ideas. So with that, let's get into the first bit.
My first claim is that the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. Hello. Hi.
Hi, I'm Samaya.
Samaya, nice to meet you. I'm Candace.
Nice to meet you too. So my question for you is, statistics show that 60% of women who are murdered by their intimate partners, murdered by someone that they are in close relations with. That's according to the UN from 2023.
Yeah.
So how is it that, women are so valued, quote unquote, in the home, and yet that's the place where they're at the most danger?
Okay, so I'm not sure what that has to do with the sexual revolution.
Right, the sexual revolution.
The first claim.
The sexual revolution gave.
I'm happy to answer it. I'm just saying that, if you broaden that statistic, you are more likely in general just to be murdered by somebody you know. So, of course.
But men are much less likely to be murdered by, their
That's not
partners.
true.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm sure, because men are less likely to be murdered by women. Full stop. Yeah, exactly. So that statistic makes sense to me. I'm still not sure how this correlates to whether or not the sexual revolution
increased women's ability to leave the house, women's ability to control their own reproductive capabilities, women's ability to, control their own capacity within the workforce in regards to their own sexual capacity. So it is the very fact that the sexual revolution happened that made our access to the workplace much more, or just the public sphere in general, much more easy. So without the sexual revolution, women would be much more confined to the place where they're at the most danger. Isn't that true?
So you think that, just so I'm trying to understand your argument here, you think that if we didn't have the sexual revolution, less women or more women would be murdered? Are you saying that women are
more women would be murdered, for sure.
Okay, I disagree with that. I still don't think it has anything to do with the claim that women are infinitely less happy because of the sexual revolution, which has devalued women.
I think you'd probably be less happy if you're being murdered.
Oh.
Anyone disagree?
Okay, yeah, I don't, okay.
So you can make all these snide comments all you like, but the sexual revolution was a revolution in the Western world specifically that sought to destroy the nuclear family. And the nuclear family, raising children in a two-parent household, is the backbone of society. People who don't come from a stable family and single mother homes, actually, which is, a byproduct of the sexual revolution, are much more likely to end up in prison, to be murderers, to be rapists, to live in poverty and the likes. And this is all byproducts of this sexual revolution and the breakdown of the nuclear family in society.
There is definitely a correlation between personal relationships and domestic violence. And just to be clear, if we're talking about just a monogamous relationships, the most violent relationships that are on the books are between lesbian partners. Yes, when people are intimate,
that's not a true
That is
statistic.
actually true.
No, the statistic you're talking about is people who have faced domestic violence. Lesbians, yes, are more likely to have faced domestic violence, but that's because they typically came from relationships with men in which they were mistreated.
Lesbian relationships are the most violent relationships that we have on the books.
But we can move on.
They can fact check that claim.
Yeah, I'm sure you would like to move on. But just such an absurd point here. They just actually fact checked her. And the Jubilee fact check actually says a survey from 2013 shows that 61% of bisexual women, 44% of lesbian women reported intimate partner violence as compared to 35% of straight women. But her argument here is that the only reason why these women from the lesbian relationships are reporting domestic violence at a higher rate is because they've come from relationships with men. Those relationships that are statistically much less likely to report DV. Yeah, makes just a whole lot of sense. I mean, if that point shows anything, it just shows that there's always a way to blame men for everything. Now, in the next one, we have got somebody who is just almost impressively woke. Every single woke platitude you can possibly think of comes up here. It really is a sight to behold. Let's check it out.
Hello.
Hi there.
How are you? I'm Candace.
Nice to meet you. Julian, my pronouns are they, them. It's very interesting to think of it when we just think about the gender binary. It's, how do we place value on human beings in general? And so when we think about, placing value, that comes from a place of power, right? So I think let's select like the Victorian era. You have this dominant group of people coming from white supremacy, deciding who gets to have a proper status in the world.
Guys, before we get to the rest of this one, I need to tell you about the sponsor of today's video that makes it possible. This is a demonetized video, so without these guys, I cannot make this, and that is Ground News. Ground News allows me to keep up with all of the best breaking news stories, such as this one today about Trump administration suing Los Angeles over sanctuary city immigration policies. The cool thing about Ground News is that you can go down here and you can see exactly how these stories are being reported by left, center, and right. Heaps of sources for this one, and you can also see the bias distribution. We can see how much it's being reported by the left, center, and right, and the publications that are actually reporting on it. And you can even go as far as to check out the ownership, how much of the sources are independent news. And what's better is that Ground News have offered Rattlesnake TV listeners a massive 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use. And all you've got to do to take advantage of this amazing deal is hit those links below in the bio or pinned at the top of the comments, or hit the QR code on screen right here and get started with your Vantage plan today. And don't forget, guys, when you support Ground News, you're helping to support the channel directly because their sponsorship allows me to make this content. And with that, let's get back to it.
And so that is already like taking human beings and devaluing them. And so what the sexual revolution did was to help people seek out empowerment, which increased value, no matter the gender. So when it comes to sexual revolution, let's look at one contribution is sex education. I'm actually an educator. I teach sociology and LGBTQ studies.
Oh dear, an educator. This is unreal so far. We've got pronouns, we've got white supremacy, and this person is an educator of LGBTQ studies. I mean, I'm sure spending 4 years at college doing LGBTQ studies would just give you the best head start in life. But just imagine being a parent. You've put your kid through school, now they're going to go to college or university, they're all excited, got their backpack on. They rock up to the school grounds, into the classroom, and then this is what they're presented with. This is the educator. A sad representation of the current education system, I must say.
And I have absolutely seen the positive outcome with the sexual revolution and sex education and seen people empower themselves. And with that comes safety when it comes to decreasing STIs, abuse, sexual assault. Again, people get to empower themselves of all genders. And I know earlier you mentioned about violence amongst lesbians and sapphic community, which I do identify within. All genders can be subjected to violence.
That was the point I was making. So I wasn't sure of how her claim was relating to what we were talking about, whether or not it makes people happy or unhappy. Relationships are obviously a ground where there can be violence.
I guess I could just wrap it up by saying, like, if we all have access to like sex education through the incredible work of feminists through the sexual revolution, we are able to gain access to information and gain skills to create an equitable society, egalitarian within our relationships, whether it be platonic or romantic. I'm so grateful for those feminists who have fought for us so we can gain those spaces and create a healthier society.
Okay, are you a believer in the government doing everything that it can to make people happy?
So when it comes, as someone that teaches in the public sector, I understand the concern when it comes to like, what is a teacher, what kind of information they're providing to the students. I do believe that we, as a teacher, I should be able to give that sort of information. Again, I teach college students. One of my claims is I believe that we should mandate sex education amongst college students. So yes, I do want the state, I would like the government to give us those resources so we can implement that curriculum.
Okay, you consider yourself a feminist, I'm assuming?
Queer feminists. There's variations, right?
So the situation that we just laid out before about sending your kids to college gets worse. Imagine you send your kids to college and it's a queer, non-binary, lesbian feminist who is wanting to teach them sex education. Just think about that.
What is a queer feminist as opposed to a feminist, just so I understand?
Well, so I heavily believe in queer theory. So, the gender binary that we understand, it comes from colonization. So someone who is mixed race, family from Mexico, we have the Moches in Mexico, which is an indigenous tribe. They believed in gender fluidity. And then you have European colonizers coming who dismantle that. And now everything that we understand when it comes to gender is a Western lens.
Okay, so some totally accurate history here, guys. Before colonialism, all of the native people, all of the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Egyptians and the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, all of them, they saw gender as just fluid. They didn't have any gender roles. There were no hunters and gatherers. The men and women all just fought side by side in all of the wars. There was no sort of gender divide there. And then the colonialists come in, and the colonialists implement this sort of white Eurocentric view of biology, whatever the hell that is.
So from a queer...
So you don't even think women exist, I'm guessing.
I think everyone should be empowered to figure out their identity and explore the language that best describes themselves. So freedom, America, right? America, freedom. And I want to believe in that when it comes to identity. Right. Everyone should have the freedom to decide how they want to identify, as long as they're not causing harm. But that's where we get into the debate, what is harm?
So just, again, to be clear, to go back to this claim, we are debating female happiness. Mm-hmm. You are saying you do not identify as a female.
I identify with all gender expressions. So from masculinity to femininity. So
I'm just saying... Are you just saying that as a part of queer theory, you're debating whether or not women are happier after the sexual revolution? I'm just trying to understand, because it seems like you're debating queer theory as opposed to female.
I believe all genders benefit from the sexual revolution.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Just imagine how confused an individual you would have to be a queer, non-binary, identifying with all different gender expressions, educator in sex education, and your whole entire life, your whole entire worldview is built around gender and LGBTQ studies, which are just inherently fixated on gender and sex, but you actually don't think that that thing exists, and then you want to go and debate that thing. Just unbelievable how these people actually graduated preschool. I mean, I honestly don't know how they get by in everyday life, just with everyday menial tasks. But anyways, let's carry on. In the next part, we have got this girl, Zena, who was on Whatever recently, and she's actually a pretty decent debater. I mean, for college kids, she's decent. And she has her talking points here, and she's able to actually walk Candace down a logic tree to try and put her in a corner. And Candace does get a little bit trapped here, so we're gonna do a little bit of a review of the tactics and arguments that maybe Candace should have used.
Hello.
I'm Zena.
Zena, very much like your name.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Can we start with the beginning? Do you identify as a female?
I identify as a woman, yeah.
Okay.
Right. So I do want to get back to your premise. You're saying that women have been devalued, right, by the sexual revolution. This kind of presumes two things. One, that there has been a loss of worth, right, for women. So you're saying that women have, as human beings, lost worth. Women who, prior to their sexual revolution, were worth more than women today.
I would say that, yes, women have devalued themselves by becoming overtly
According
sexual. That's my claim. So, I mean, also according to just, and let's not remove this from the other part of the claim, which that it has made women infinitely less happy.
Right. So are you saying, but you're saying that according to you, women have been devalued?
Not according to me. According to the time in which people are getting married, how difficult it is for people to find a partner that's willing to commit to them. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that women are offering sex for free, because it was a major component of the sexual revolution was this idea.
So a woman's worth is tied to her sexuality?
It's not tied to, well, absolutely. If you're going to be having multiple partners, you are going to be devaluing yourself.
You're worth less as a human being.
Not as a human being, just, in terms of trying to have a partnership and a productive relationship. Certainly men are not going to be clamoring to have a relationship with somebody when the market is throwing them.
So there's a really important distinction that needs to be made here, because this is something that these leftists do, especially in this debate when you're talking about sexual market value. This is something that comes up quite a lot on the various different podcasts, some of the ones that I've been on, whatever, etc. They'll say, well, you hate women, you think that women have no value, you think that women are worthless. That's actually not what we're saying at all. We're not talking about the ontological status of women. We're not saying that they're less valuable as human beings. We're saying that your actions actually dictate your sexual market value. Your actions and your credentials dictate how valuable you are in certain industries and certain situations. So for example, if I'm a college graduate lawyer, then I have less market value than a CEO of a law firm. That doesn't mean that I'm less valuable as a person. It doesn't mean that my life is worth less. It just means that I have less value in that particular realm. And it's the same with sexual market value. If you are extremely promiscuous as a woman, and if you're overweight, and if you can't hook up a nice steak stake, then you're going to have less market value and the market will respond accordingly to that.
A man's response to your actions is what defines your worth, right?
Yeah, well, I would say that I would argue that what makes women actually happy is family. So if you're interrupting, so just to connect the dots for you, when women are having sex with multiple partners, it devalues them for men, right?
For men. So,
yes. So
men define a woman's worth.
Well, I would say both of them kind of define one another's worth, because I think the ultimate goal for people to be happy is actually family.
She thinks this is a gotcha here, but it's not a gotcha. Yes, in terms of sexual market value, the male population dictates the worth of the female population, and the same is in reverse. If you are not getting any male attention, and if no male wants to put a ring on your finger and no male wants to commit to you, then you have less value than the woman who does get that commitment. In this debate situation, you can very easily just bite that bullet and say, yes, men do dictate the woman's worth in the sexual marketplace. So you just have to make that distinction between the actual value of the human being and the sexual market value.
Okay, so you're saying in all cases, a woman is going to be more fulfilled in regards to family.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And this is going to work in all cases. So you're saying there's no individual case in which a woman can feel, fulfilled without being tied to other people in the case of family.
I think there could be an exceptional case for everything. I think there are exceptional cases, but I think that if we all start trying to be the exception as opposed to recognizing the rule, which is that people in life are more fulfilled when they achieve a family unit and when they have children, women in particular, especially aspiring to children, then you are going to end up with a bunch of people who are unhappy because your job cannot replace the feeling of having a family.
So what you're saying is we need to look at every individual case and see what is going to fulfill you or what is going to, I guess, essentially predict your happiness more.
Quickly here before she gets into the next point. She tried to assign a monolithic position to Candace there by saying, well, you think that there is not a single case where a woman could be fulfilled without having children. That's not what Candace said, even though Candace bit that bullet when she probably shouldn't have. But with everything in life, when we're talking about accurate prescriptions for a healthy society, we make generalities. We can't look at every single human being and then make some sort of an extremely nuanced prescription for society based on that. We have to look at what generally makes for a healthier society, and then the exceptions don't make the rule. Let's carry on.
Because if we look at, for example, the Nordic countries, right? These are countries, I'm talking about like Sweden, Denmark, right? These countries tend to be like, I think in the past 14 years, they've been ranked as the highest in happiness and marital satisfaction from women, right? And we see that they also have been the most open in regards to like, sexual norms and sexual roles, right? So, and we also see that there's less rates of like STDs reported. We see more, and that's also due to comprehensive sex education that's pushed in those countries. So we see that and that's like a direct result of the sexual revolution.
Guys, just a quick reminder to smash that like button with all of your might and fury and subscribe to the channel if you have not already and if you enjoy these debate breakdowns. Let's get back to it.
Right, so when we're seeing that direct reports of happiness, right, we don't have these same rates in America. In these countries that are more sexually open, why would we see like those rates in those type of countries?
So I think you might be referring to this sort of mass-produced study that was a part of like a behavioral science study, which said that women were the happiest women in the world were women that were actually unmarried and had careers. No. Okay. Well, there was
reported happiness.
Okay, sure. I'm talking about the same thing. It was reported happiness, but it could be there's tons of studies. The point being is that in 2023, there was this massive scandal where they recognized that a lot of these studies that were being produced, behavioral science, was proven to be a complete fraud. And they were unable to reproduce these studies, and they also found that the data had been faked. The data that we can look at that I think shows, and you can let me know if you agree with this, if women, and under the imagination of the feminist umbrella, were really unhappy when they were in the home, and then entering the workforce has made women happier and infinitely feeling more secure about themselves, we could, I think, reasonably expect that there would have been a decrease in suicide rates amongst women.
You would have to go ahead and show how that correlation, right, is going to be a direct cause of women going into the workforce.
Okay, well, how can we, let's measure, then you have to give me a way that we can measure happiness. How can we measure happiness? So I would say suicide rates would be a good thing to look at. Drug, alcohol consumption would be a good thing to look at.
Of course, right? But we would have to, I can say at this point in society, I don't think everyone is happy. I think there's a lot of things that we need to reconcile in society.
That's what I'm getting at.
Right,
so
but we have to look at the cause, right? Why are these things predicted, right? And for example, if we talk about men, there are a lot of things we can look at, right? That tend to predetermined suicide, right? But we can't say, oh, these two things are happening at the same time. This caused this other thing.
Yes, that's right. But I do think that we can objectively say that women who are committing suicide rates more than they were in the 1950s, like it has actually increased marginally. That's not a sign that us entering the workforce suddenly made us all very happy. How is it a
cause of the workforce?
We're also binge drinking at a higher rate.
How's this cause of
opioids at a higher rate?
How is this a cause of entering the workforce?
Because I think women are being put on a pathway aspirationally.
But you're gonna have to. You're saying you think this, right? But where's the cause? Like you're not substantiating the claim. You're saying this is what I think. I'm seeing two.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Thank you so much.
Great job. Great job.
So another sneaky leftist tactic there. She's trying to really pin Candace Owens down on some sort of a causation correlation fallacy. She's saying, well, you're making this claim, but you can't substantiate it with some sort of cause. You're pointing out a correlation, but where's the cause? Well, she said before that all of these people in the Nordic countries are happier because of the sexual revolution. She said that this is why they report such higher levels of happiness. Well, I'd have you know that actually Nordic countries are some of the whitest countries in the world. They are some of the most culturally homogenous countries in the world. So my position on this is actually going to be that the reason why they are so happy is because they are more white. And the reason why I'm so comfortable in taking this position is because I disregard her position because she has to show me causation. That's just correlation. There's no causation. So I think that my argument is actually stronger in this case. I think that the whiteness has a stronger correlation. So another one to be careful of there when somebody tries to really pin you down on this whole correlation causation thing. Now onto the second claim that Candace makes, and she is confronted with a male feminist. Now we know what the male feminists are here for. They don't truly believe in the cause. What they are trying to do is get laid. Now let's watch this guy's tactic for getting laid.
My second claim is that no career will give women as much joy and fulfillment as raising children.
Not today. Oh, hi, Candace. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm John. Okay, so I feel like a lot of your arguments today are very rooted in a sort of old school perspective, I have to be honest. Like, I think, and I'm not trying to be insulting whatsoever, I feel as though most people would identify that claim as pretty extreme.
So not only is that very gay, what he just said, it was also a fallacy off the jump there. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's bad. If someone says to you, oh, well, that's a very old school point of view, you just say, well, I'm waiting for the punchline. I'm waiting for your argument.
Pretty like...
Children are extreme?
Well, no, that women would get more happiness inherently from raising kids than having a job or deciding what they want to do with their lives.
Why is that? I'm just curious. Why would having children, which is just a natural biological conclusion, be something that sounds extreme?
I just said inherently.
Inherently
That's the
extreme.
inherent expectation.
Yeah.
That's better for women.
It's inherent because it's biological. So I think when we think about things that are inherent, I think biology is a good thing to start with, right? So biologically speaking, men and women come together, they form families, and that's the reason why you're sitting here. That's the reason that I'm sitting here, is because biology is inherent.
Well,
so
I was
saying it's just natural order that we're speaking about, right?
Okay, let's break it down. So why do you believe that? Why do you believe that?
Why do I believe that women...
Why do you inherently are happier? Yeah.
Okay, you keep stressing this word inherent. So.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. I think because it speaks to natural order, and every piece of life, I think, is enriched by
You
children.
don't think it's natural for women to get to decide what they want to do with their lives?
I do not think that saying women can decide whether or not they want to go to work or have children is problematic. What I'm saying to you is that women will get the most fulfillment from having a family.
Because it's natural.
It's natural, but also children are wonderful and beautiful and spiritually divine creatures. I mean, they're amazing. There's everything about having a child. Yes, it's a lot of work. It's beautiful.
I hear that. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, what if there's a little girl born and it's her dream her entire life to be an author or to be, on TV or any of these things, and having children is very expensive. It takes a lot of time. So how is it better for that, and I understand this is hypothetical, but that hypothetical little girl to have children than to pursue these things that would make her happy as she gets older?
I just think that if she publishes the book and she has a child, she would agree with me that the child was more fulfilling and made her happy. That's what I'm happier than the book did, is what I'm saying. And I say this as a published author of a New York Times. I would choose my children over my best-selling book. And I was that little girl who had a dream that it would be really great if I could share my thoughts and ideas in a book, but it is utter insanity for me to reflect on that and say that I would have rather published Blackout than to have my 3 children.
But why is it rather? You see what I'm saying?
It's not rather. I'm just saying
Well, that's your claim. That's your claim is that it's better.
It will be more fulfilled. Yes.
Right. So rather.
Well, if it's an either or, if you're saying it's an either or, I'm just saying that if these 2 things have happened in your life, the thing that will bring you more spiritual fulfillment will be children. And so women who are neglecting that, who are neglecting the pathway to, strive toward family because they think their career is going to hug them at night, or they think that when they're on their deathbed, their career is going to come up next to them and say, you were so great to me. I think that they've stepped into a delusion, and I'm hopeful that they wake up from it before it's too late.
All right, pause. Yeah. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
So we already established that this was a mating strategy for this gentlemen. We all have our mating strategies, but I would advise any young guys who are thinking about going down this liberal path to really think twice and think hard about it. Because whilst the mainstream feminist propaganda may have convinced you, and maybe you watched The Notebook and these types of movies, it may have convinced you that being this sort of like champion for egalitarianism and feminism and this really super nice guy is a good mating strategy is actually the opposite of what women want. Women will use guys like this as a useful idiot, and they'll give them a pat on the back and they'll say, oh yeah, you're such a great guy, such a nice guy. But then when it comes to the guys that they actually want to date, they want to date the opposite to the soy boy that we are seeing on screen here. This is the sort of guy that would have no boundaries whatsoever. And he's the kind of guy who would want to go 50-50 on a date. And he's the kind of guy who would be happy to stay home and use his wife's credit card. And inevitably, women just end up completely resenting guys like this. So, terrible strategy, don't do it. Anyways, let's carry on to one of the most angry and insufferable feminists. Somebody who has been featured on this channel a few times and always looks like she is about to burst a vein in her head or have some sort of a full-on mental breakdown. Let's check it out.
Hi, I'm Ceci.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So your claim is that women will be happier at home. I think you're conflating, though, happiness with importance, because I get what you're saying, where a woman can write a book and have kids, but the kids are always going to make her happier. But I think it just means that kids are always going to be more important, not necessarily make you happier. But also piggybacking on Naima, we don't live in an economy where people typically can have a one-income household.
Right.
Whether it be the mom or dad that stays home. And so I think, and you keep bringing up the 1950s, which—
because it was right before the fact.
I just don't know if that's the period of time that you want to go back to.
No, it's just, I'm just going back to the first wave of feminism.
But you want to undo progress that's been done. So I'm curious as to what decade you'd be comfortable living in, especially as a Black woman.
Okay, so we're going to park aside the race politics.
So just a little bit of casual white liberal racism there. We love to see that. It always comes out after a while. But I actually think that this is such a layup for conservatives in these sorts of debates. These liberals think that it's some sort of a self-evident truth that, oh, we wouldn't want to go back to the 1950s. Why not? What's wrong with saying that living in the 1950s was a lot better than now? Much higher birth rates, great communities, people could support a family on one income, you actually had people going to church, families were so much stronger, the countries that you lived in were more culturally homogenous, we didn't have iPhones and social media and dating apps and porn and all of these sort of dopamine frying things. I mean, there's a very strong case to be made that life in the 1950s was far superior to life now. I mean, technology has definitely advanced and there are some benefits to living now, but there's also a very strong case to be made that culturally and socially, life was a lot better back in the 1950s.
So I want to focus on.
Okay, then as a woman, what period of time do you want to go back to?
Just as a woman, I think that it was probably a better environment for women when we understood that raising our children was fulfilling.
But some women still do understand that.
Right. And
a lot of women
and I'm one of them.
And I'm here advocating for you to be able to live the life that you want and for other women to be able to live the lives they want.
Do you have children?
No.
Okay. You have a career, I presume?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you work at? What field do you work in?
I do hair.
Okay. Wonderful. So I have both children and a career, as somebody pointed out. And so the fact that I'm saying that you will be infinitely more fulfilled at the end of the day by raising your children than you will be if you come home and you say, wow, I really crushed it dyeing somebody's hair today. What is it exactly that makes you angry about hearing that? Like, that's what I'm actually trying.
Nothing makes
I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get to the implicit revolution.
That's the thing, is that no one
when
is
someone
angry.
mentions children.
No, see, no one's angry when you mention children. I get angry, I guess, when you mention that someone should have a children, or you're trying to impose a lifestyle onto people that you want to live, which I think is kind of funny because as someone who's anti-feminism, you practice it more than most women do. I mean, every time you get on your podcast, every time you collect a check, you're practicing feminism.
Okay, that's what you think.
You're practicing feminism? She just doesn't have any idea about what feminism is. Feminism was designed specifically to destroy the nuclear family by a bunch of Marxist witches, government figures, and industrial capitalists. And Candace asked her why she's so angry, and this is because when somebody has to look in the mirror and reflect on their life choices, they can take one of two paths. They can either take accountability and say, you know what, maybe I made a bad decision and I want to actually ensure that people who come after me, or the young women who come after me, don't make the bad decisions that I made. Or you can cope about it and try and act like it's the white man or the patriarchy who's holding you down. And it's not your own life decisions to pursue a career in hair instead of having a family.
No, that's what it is. Because
Actually,
without feminism, you wouldn't be able to exist.
Yeah, people keep saying, I hate when people say that.
But
because
it's just the
it
truth.
just shows that you haven't done the research to even understand where the feminism
Or you don't know
came from,
history.
which was discovered. That's what I'm saying about you, because it means that you don't understand that a bunch of government officials in the CIA funded the feminist movement. So for all of your hatred for the patriarchy,
I'm so confused.
and
So my question is it bad that they funded it or bad that it just happened?
Men wanted women to go into the workforce. The government, which had a lot of men, it was being
Are
run
you
by
talking
men.
about because World War II occurred and we had to
No,
go
I'm
to
talking-
factories, and then when we left the factories, they forced us back into the homes?
That's not what I'm saying at all. So let me tell you what I'm saying, and then you can respond to it.
Go for it.
Gloria Steinem is considered to be a feminist icon, right? Because she led these protests. She also had a bunch of music festivals. She got students involved. It is just a fact that Gloria Steinem was funded by the CIA, okay? The CIA, being the male-dominated CIA of the 50s and the 60s, funded those movements. So what do you think was the explicit aim? Do you think it was because the government really wanted you to be more free, that they wanted to encourage women to enter
Well,
the
I have to be honest with
workforce?
you, I couldn't speak on behalf of the government.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And what their intention
Well, I think it's important
was
because you
with
just said that I don't know history. And I think it's pretty important if you're going to sit across from me and say, I don't know history, that you learn a
but-
piece of history and then question as
You keep bringing up men, and I think it's funny because we should talk about men more. Like you brought up suicide, they're 4 times more likely to kill themselves.
which is why I don't
And while
believe-
women, we're twice as more often on antidepressants, but that's because we go out and do what we need to do to keep coping.
because we're not happy.
And we need to focus on men and the patriarchy because it's actually oppressed them just as much as women now emotionally, right? Because when we're kids, our parents teach us how to cross the street. Look both ways so you can get the other side unharmed. When a boy comes across a feeling, and I'm using men and boys here because they're the ones suffering, women are too, but emotionally. When they come across a feeling they haven't felt before, we have to teach them how to get to the other side and cope with it. Otherwise, they stay where they are. That anger and resentment builds. That's the feeling they become most comfortable with. That's the feeling they go to first in most situations.
All right,
So we need to
pause.
stop telling our boys that they don't cry, because they do. They just do it alone, and then they become even more alone.
Just so many bad points in that small space of time that it's actually hard to get through. First of all, Candace made really good points about Gloria Steinem and the CIA. I mean, this is documented. She openly admits that she was a CIA asset and a very key figure in the feminist movement. I wonder why all of these government entities wanted the women to be in the workforce and not the home. And then the point about boys and men. I mean, I'm sure that if there's anything that's going to make boys and men more happy and less suicidal, it's going to be listening to her yapping at them. I mean, I'm a pretty happy guy, but I feel like after listening to that, I need to have a shower or go and scream in the secluded woods somewhere.
Sometimes you just need to get alone in nature.
Now, the next part is a prompt that I actually seriously disagree with Candace about.
My next claim is that we live under a matriarchy, not a patriarchy. Hi.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Princella, the Queen Maker.
I love that.
So you say we live in a matriarchy.
Right.
Can you give me the definition of patriarchy?
Yes. Well, the patriarchy is the idea that the system, our system in America, is being run by men, and that women are having to exist under a system that immediately disadvantages them because men are behind it. And I disagree with that pointedly. I think actually we're living in a society where people are being very much influenced socially and politically by women.
Okay, so the denotative definition of patriarchy is father rule, and where positions of government are held majorly by men, where women are largely excluded. So 125 House of Representatives are female, and that's only about 25%.
Right.
And only about 28% make up Senate, and 3.3% of Congress up until this date have ever been women. So by denotative definition, we literally live in a patriarchy.
So I actually agree with her here. I think that Candace Owens is fundamentally wrong about this and that she's fundamentally right, but I don't agree with her for the same reasons that she's about to lay out. We definitely do live in a patriarchy. Some of the key aspects include politics, men dominating roles of leadership and government. Economically, men control wealth and property, but also, this force doctrine, men have a monopoly on force. They fight all of the wars, and they have the ability to collectively rise up and overthrow a government. And the fact of the matter is that without men in certain positions in society, society collapses because women can't actually maintain infrastructure, park cars, fight wars, tell funny jokes, be in the primary provider positions en masse. Otherwise, the birth rates will continue to fall off a cliff even more. It's actually not possible for a true matriarchy to exist, and that's why one has never existed. But I think what's happened here is that Candace is just getting her terms mixed up. We don't live in a matriarchy, but we do live in a gynocentric or femme-centric social order. This just means that much of the messaging and privileges are catered towards women, which ultimately means that men do and will always retain the positions of power, but they're benevolent enough or silly enough to let women larp around as boss babes.
Yes, so I disagree with that. So I think what this gets to, which is actually an important part of the conversation, is that people always think that where there is disparity, there's somehow inequality, and I actually reject that entirely. I think it's just a difference in what we're interested in. I think we're biologically wired, we're interested in different careers, and just because if we looked in the fashion industry and said, oh, well, it's being dominated by women, it wouldn't mean that, okay, well, that means that the fashion industry is a matriarchy and men have no sense. It just means have no ability to communicate how they feel in the fashion industry. I literally think that those numbers show that we're just biologically different. So I actually think politically, women have shown that they have a lot more power than men have. And I'm talking about just in terms of political movements. The most recent I can think of is the Me Too movement, right? If a bunch of women get together and complain about a man and refer to the patriarchy and scream, generally speaking, let me know if you agree, the media will celebrate that. If a bunch of men got together and were shrieking and speaking about women, generally speaking, the media would call them all white supremacists and say that we had a misogyny problem and that things were really wrong in society. Women are allowed to be more vocal in general about problems than men are.
Well, let me speak to that. When we're talking about government and media, these are two different things. So under the denotative definition of a patriarchy, by the percentages that are occupied in the government, which is majority male, defines us as a patriarchy. Now, what it comes to for capitalism, for marketing purposes and control, for capital and revenue, that is a totally different conversation. But who's making the laws? I don't think that women are the ones voting to have their reproductive rights taken away, where you have rape, incest, and all of these things excluded to force women to be able to have. I don't think women in government would largely vote against their own interests because it's majority male. Patriarchy.
And that's why women shouldn't vote, because if they are voting en masse and they make up a more substantial amount of the population than men, then you may have noticed that it feels as though every single election is just about whether or not they can have abortions, because many women are actually just single issue voters with this sort of stuff. Anyways, this video definitely won't divide the comments. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check out Ground News, all the links just below. Thank you to them for sponsoring this video. Like the video if you can, subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to watch another one, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.